I think there's a wedge that you can put in there. I think that, yeah, so you're not opening the door.
Okay, well, I guess we'll get started. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so glad to see so many of you here this afternoon on this Wednesday, October 6th. Also, walk, bike, and roll to school day. So good to be here for another session of student achievement. We have a really jam-packed session with some important information. I'm looking forward to hearing from our chief of schools as we do a 101 session on all of our schools and hearing from our data and accountability team to look at some of the information and the numbers that help us understand how we are doing in the district academically. And so we will go ahead and get started with our meeting, and I will now entertain a motion for the approval of our minutes from the September meeting.
So moved. Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So the motion carries. And so I will turn it over to, looks like Dr. Wilson Norman. You're going to get us started?
Get us started, that we are excited to continue sharing the partnership work between the Chief of Schools Office, the Chief Academic Officer's Office, as well as the Chief of Staff's Office. Today you'll see some of that partnership work in which the Chief of Schools and her team provide a lot of implementation and in the schools work. And we feel like collectively with the data and our focus on academics and academic achievement, that partnership is strengthened. And so I'd like to welcome Ms. Ellis to the table and her team.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did.
Well, good afternoon. So as Dr. Wilson Norman has shared, we will be giving you a high-level overview of our 198 schools, but we will do a focus on our magnet schools and our restart schools. And we think that that's important because we know there's been a lot of conversation, not just about schools and academic achievement, but a lot of emphasis on our designated low performance schools, schools that are either eligible or already in the restart status. And we want you as a board to have as much information as possible around those two areas. So as Dr. Wilson Norman has shared, there is a strong partnership with Chief Academic Officer as well as the Chief of Staff as it relates to data and the Office of Professional Learning and how do we support schools in the collaboration around the area superintendents. So I'll start there with just understanding 198 schools, that's a lot of schools. We will open one school, as you all know, next year, Woods Creek. After that, we will, the following year, we will open an additional 5 to 6 schools with a plan of 6 schools. And so it's a lot to manage under all the calendars. As you all know, we also have calendar schools as it relates to the modified schools, the traditional schools, our early college schools, et cetera. But I do want us today to focus on these two significant areas of schools that I don't think enough attention is given and enough conversation around how do all the departments support the efforts and the work of Restart. So a very quick overview of Restart is that it started in the state in 2016. When we started, we only had 2 schools. That's Barwell and Walnut Creek Elementary School. And so I will let Mr. Overman speak a little bit about those schools and that process. But just know as a state, we're just in a 7 years, 7 years of this work. And you will hear at a high level with Restart about the flexibilities around it, and a number of people who are critical to this work. They are here today to even share some input along with a couple of principals who are here, and we'll talk about how their efforts and their leadership and some of the things that they do have removed them from reoccurring low performing. Because that is always a question, what do you all do to ensure that we do move them out of designated low performing and out of Restart? And so it's going to be a robust conversation, but it will be at a high level because we know that there will be questions had for both areas. And again, I'm going to say a little bit about magnets because once Mr. Overman speaks about Restart and and he asked for questions there, he will follow it up or pass the baton to Dr. Lane, who is very passionate about magnet schools. And so I would close out with some data around both of those areas and where there's opportunity for us to grow and do and realize what we have in our strategic plan, what we also have in our new equity plan, and how those two integrate into the work of supporting our Restart schools, our Restart principals, and looking at our own policies, processes, and procedures that will give us greater traction and assurances that we will be moving these schools out of low performing status, but where each and every one of those students should be. Okay?
Thank
All
you,
right.
Ms. Ellis.
You're welcome.
Thank you. All right, so good afternoon, and thank you guys for having us today. My colleague here, Dr. Mark Savage, is with me at the table. We also have some other area superintendents, senior administrators, our other core team participants from budget and HR here as well, and we'll introduce the principals a little bit later in the presentation. But thank you for having us today to talk a little bit about Restart, particularly Restart in WCPSS. And so, as Ms. Ellis stated, this started back in 2016 for us as a district, and we were one of the first districts to have schools as a part of this process, and we started with Barwell Road and Walnut Creek. And in terms of how we manage and monitor in the district, of course, Ms. Ellis is the contact from North Carolina DPI, and then the area superintendents monitor the compliance and ensure compliance with Restart flexibilities and things of that nature. So there are 7 of our area superintendents that have Restart schools, and so we meet on a regular basis, which we'll talk about in a moment as well. But again, today is just the intent to give you a high-level overview of Restarts. Okay.
Can I interject a little bit on
Absolutely.
that? So with those 7 schools, for a while it had been 6 of the 9, and so even the 7th school only has 1. But I offer that up to let you know that every year we could have schools that are eligible, and you will hear about eligibility for Restart.
Good. So we always want to be sure that our work is aligned with our strategic plan, and so you can got to look for how we're aligned or the Restart objectives are aligned to our strategic plan and our aims. So that's important as we have discussions across the district. I'm going to back up a little bit and talk about Restart in North Carolina, and then I'm going to kind of hone in on what we do in Wake County. And so, as I stated, it was started in 2016 when the state board passed a new policy that was tied to 2010 law designating the help for recurring low-performing schools. And the goal was to give traditional schools charter-like flexibilities. And so if charter schools have all of these rights or flexibilities to be able to try these different things, then we felt that the public schools needed to be able to do that as well, the public traditional schools. And so with that, there were some goals and things that were, put out in terms of the first Restart schools for the state. And so again, it was looking at removing barriers that may interfere with the instruction process or student achievement process. Having the opportunity to utilize flexibilities to address some specific school or student needs, and then modeling innovative instructional practices. Sometimes we can be a little tight in terms of what we expect to see, which is a good thing, but also want to be sure that if that serves as a barrier for some schools, we want to be sure they have the opportunity to try some innovative things. And then having the opportunity to leverage those flexibilities, again, to increase student achievement, because they're identified based on schools not performing as well, and so we want to be sure that we're moving the needle on those schools in terms of student achievement. So I talked about 2016 when we started with the two inaugural schools, Barwell Road and Walnut Creek. So that's been quite a journey, a lot of lessons learned since we started with those two schools. As Ms. Ellis stated, we currently have, I think, 198 schools in the district. 34 schools are utilizing the Restart model in this particular school year. We will have 10 additional schools that are eligible for Restart for 24-25. And so, again, we felt it was important as well. In the beginning, things kind of evolved with Restart at the state level and at the district level. A few years back, we determined that we needed a purpose within Wake County to ensure that our schools were focused. And so you can see here that the purpose of our Restart schools in Wake County, again, is focused on increasing student achievement. And you can do that by utilizing the identified flexibilities, addressing resources and things of that nature. But that was an important step for us as a district, because before we kind of got stuck on the innovative side. And so we were seeing innovation, but not necessarily seeing the student achievement increase. And so really important for us to kind of center and focus on ensuring that schools are focusing on improving student achievement. And you just stop me or jump in anytime, okay, that you're on. I talked a little bit about earlier that we have a core team within the district. So we have a core team that's made up of the different people that are listed here. The most important thing to remember is that Restart kind of goes across all departments. These are key folks that meet every other week with the task of providing ongoing support and guidance to schools, also helping them to define the planning process for our new schools, and then monitoring kind of how are we spending the Restart dollars that they're accumulating, and what are they focusing on, and then reviewing flexibility requests. So a lot of times, and we'll talk about the flexibilities in a moment, but a school may come up with something that they want to do different that we've never done before in the district. And so when that happens, we have to see which department it impacts. And then we have a conversation with that department, and we work with that department to identify how we can support and help the school to be able to utilize that flexibility. So you will have the opportunity to see some of the flexibilities in a moment. But I'll talk a little bit about performance. I know that Ms. Ellis is going to talk more about performance, but we have 4 Restart schools from the 2021 to 2023 time period that have remained out of recurring low performing status. And if you recall, recurring low performance status means 2 out of the last 3 years. And so we're really excited about that, and we have some other schools that are on that trajectory as well. But are really happy with the fact that we have those 4 schools that have remained out. And we have one of those principals here that's out of the recurring low performing and one that's out of low performing status. And we'll give them a chance to talk in a minute about flexibilities that they've utilized and kind of what it's meant for them at their school. You know the status in terms of low performing being identified by your school performance grade, and then if you met or exceeded growth or did not meet growth. And so we've had some success with schools moving out of low performance over the years, continue to have that same amount of growth or same growth. And we're looking at how we can really move them to that recurring status that I talked about, and being able to stay out of that status. And so, of course, that takes multiple years of work. But you can see some of the successes and things that we've had over the years. And so our Restart principals have worked really hard. They work really hard to be creative, innovative. They have opportunities to see what some other schools are doing in other districts to address some of their specific student achievement needs. So we're very proud of them.
Yes, and I just want to reiterate, it is a lot of work. It is a lot of work for every staff member, the principal, the administrative team, the bookkeepers, data managers, every person in that building. It takes them all to do that provide that level of support. And so you will hear, as we talk a little bit about flexibilities and some lessons learned of just how important it is to have a strong sense and a strong understanding of the budget and how complex it is. It is not easy at all, and we have a very high turnover in Restart Schools in that area of data managers because of how complex it is. And so I do want to highlight that, because those schools that are moving out of designated low performing, and those schools that are moving out of recurring low performing, it is a Herculean's task for them to do it, and it takes so many people to make that happen, along with the work of the area superintendents and the senior administrators they work hand in hand on the school improvement planning processes to ensure the alignment is there. And you'll hear a little bit about that. And another part that I want to speak about is the team. You can go back to that core team. That core team has just started. We have not had a core team since the inception. This has been in the last year, and I thank HR and Donna Sherrill and Stidham and Donna Moore in working with the area superintendents and looking at how we can better align and leverage some of the flexibilities. What we were finding is a high level of inconsistencies around it, and what we were finding was that it depended on what the principal knew, how experienced, how much the principal knew about requests for flexibility. So we wanted to make that not just, we wanted to make it more transparent, and we wanted to ensure that this flexibility wasn't a equity issue. And I say the word equity issue is because it depends on who knows what and who knows what to ask. And so we removed that as one of the barriers. Everyone knows, all those principals know how to go through a process seeking a flexibility. And I do think that's important to note, that this has just occurred as in this tight alignment over the last year.
Good, thank you, thank you. I do want to be sure that I mention the 4 schools because they've done such great work. So we've got Creech Road Elementary, Lake Myra Elementary, Lincoln Heights Elementary, and Poe Elementary schools that have remained out of recurring performance status. So thank you. Yep.
And remember, that means exceeding. They either exceed in growth, or they are,
grade C or higher.
or they have a grade C or higher.
Yeah, so, yep, very positive. So when we talk about school flexibilities and removing barriers, and we try to look at things that sometimes are a part of our process, sometimes are a part of the state process, that may slow schools down or not allow them to do the work that they need to do. And so here we've provided a couple of examples for you. So one of the things that schools do under budget flexibility is to utilize LAP salaries to provide additional learning support and opportunities for students. That could be in the form of tutors, that could be in the form of hiring an additional teacher to work with small groups over the course of the day, could be used to hire an instructional coach to provide support to staff, depending on what's needed there. There could be things like supplemental curriculum resources or assessment tools that are needed. So it just gives them the flexibility to be able to utilize their budget to purchase or do some of those things. Some of the human resource flexibilities that we are utilizing, we have a lot of folks that convert positions, and you know that, like, we're not allowed to convert teacher assistant positions, but Restart Schools do have that flexibility to be able to convert those as needed to address achievement and staffing needs. Sometimes I talked about hiring teachers. Sometimes, particularly in coming through COVID, we found ourselves in a place where we were not getting the applicant pool that we'd had before. So the Restart flexibilities allowed for schools to be able to hire people out of certification. And so sometimes that's a good thing. You have to be sure that you're hiring the right people with the right skills. But sometimes there are people that are in industry that have some of the same skills that we're looking for in terms of the classroom. And so schools have that flexibility to hire some of those folks. They also have the opportunity, as Ms. Ellis talked about, the burden sometimes that the Restart budget can put on the data manager or the school bookkeeper. So schools have the opportunity as well to provide additional compensation that's different than the state salary. And so, as Ms. Ellis also talked about, one of the things that we want to be sure that we're doing is kind of doing that consistently across the district, so that it's equitable across the district when schools are able to do those things. So those are a host of examples of school flexibilities that some of our Restart schools are utilizing. One of the other things that's been really exciting for us is to look at, now that we've been doing this for a few years, we are having the opportunity to look at flexibilities within all schools, but then kind of mapping out the schools that are being really successful, what are those flexibilities that they're utilizing? And so if we bring on additional Restart schools, then we're able to tell them, hey, this is a flexibility that was utilized by schools that are no longer recurring, low performing. So let's start here. This is a great place for you to start or consider. And so, as I stated earlier, we have a couple of principals with us, and I'll tell you a couple of flexibilities that we've identified that those schools are utilizing, and then I'll give them an opportunity to talk. I'll give my colleague a chance to introduce his principal, and I'll introduce mine.
Pleased to have Jessie Hafner here. She's at Forestville Elementary. Jessie's a real model for Restart leadership in our region. She's also a finalist for Principal of the Year, so we'll see her tomorrow. Because of Jessie's innovative work, she's been asked next week to speak at part of a panel at the Restart District and School Leaders meeting in Raleigh. That's a statewide group of district and state leaders based on her creativity and innovation. She's hosted multiple walks there at Forestville to see how she does it. We're just glad to have her here.
Good, thank you. Thank you for being here, Jessie. And I have Mr. Ralph Chu, who is here with us. He is the principal at Creech Road Elementary School. Mr. Chu is new on the arrival at Creech Road, but I have talked with him during interviews and other time periods to let him know the different things that we have in terms of expectations at Creech Road. And so he understands, too, as he's walked in, the importance of the flexibilities and the leverage that he's able to utilize with Restart. And so just really appreciate him being here today as well. And want to give you guys an opportunity to share anything that you would like to share, if you would like to. If not, we understand.
You want to come up?
You guys want to come?
Sure.
And do know our goal is for all of our designated low-performing Restart schools to become
Yeah.
non-low-performing.
Yeah, non-recurring.
So I definitely enjoy being a Restart school. One of the flexibilities that has really helped our school achieve great student success is having the flexibility of the human resource piece. I use a lot of our LAP salaries to fund additional adults. And so I use all of those additional adults to create instructional support positions so that we are able to provide multiple teachers at every grade level, not just classroom teachers, but instructional support adults that go in during literacy and math time to provide extra small group instruction. So at any given time, you could go into any classroom, K-5, and there will always be, for example, literacy, 2 adults in there teaching literacy. And so we do that so that we're making sure that more students are getting one-on-one time or small group time with adults, as opposed to them sitting there doing independent work. Another great thing is the conversion. I have a high population, Hispanic population at Forestville Road, and so I was able to convert months into getting a second full-time ESL teacher, and also a third full-time CCR teacher for special education. And so therefore we're making sure that we're meeting the needs of our most needy populations at Forestville by having those extra adults to support them. Flexibility and resources, another great resource. Last year our 3rd grade was a group of students who needed additional support with reading. I called them our COVID babies because they were hit with COVID when they were in kindergarten. And so we knew from our data right from the beginning of the year that they really couldn't read at the beginning of 3rd grade. So we had to think outside the box. What can we do to help them become more successful in their reading skills? We know that they knew Letterland from K1 and 2, and so we purchased that program for 3rd grade because it's a 3rd grade Letterland kit. And so they were already familiar with the program, and so then we were able to utilize that for an entire semester to help them increase their reading skills. And they grew from 13% at the beginning of the year to 36% proficient at the end of the year. So that was another great resource that we used.
And much like Jesse shared, we also use our human resource flexibility in providing additional instructional support staff. And so we too have 2 teachers, certified teachers, in during the literacy block time to support small group instruction so that more students have a touch with the teacher and it's more targeted support for our students. We also have used the conversion flexibility, which has supported us a lot. And one of the things that we have is a restorative learning lab that has supported through Restart to even address some of the social emotional needs that we have in our school. And so that has been another flexibility that supports the academic piece, but also the whole child. And then when we talk about resources as well, we use our Restart to also provide those additional resources for our teachers. One of the resources that we've done this year is RAS Kids, which is a reading program for our students to support them having level resources for continue to be at their level where they are and to then continue to push them forward. So again, have enjoyed being a Restart school and having those flexibilities to be able to bolster our academic achievement and provide our students with those supports.
Creech Road has had a lot of growth over the years as well. They moved from an F school to a C school, and so that's been a tremendous amount of work and a tremendous amount of growth. And so, again, very proud of both of you. Thank you for sharing those flexibilities. And it's just so exciting to see. We talk a lot with the people at DPI, and they reach out to us a lot, and they're wanting our people to talk to the other Restart schools across the district, you know, because of some of the innovative things that they've been able to do. So just to really appreciate your work, and thank you for being here today. Thank you. Absolutely. You're welcome to stay.
You're
It's up
welcome
to
to
you.
stay.
Yeah.
And what we do want you to know is doable.
It is.
And if you
It's a
still
lot of
think
work.
about it, from 2006 to 16, excuse me, and to think about what their growth has been over a few years, and that's a pandemic. COVID posed some significant challenges, and so I think at the end of this, what we want you to still lead with is that with that level of alignment and us bringing that consistency around all departments and pushing in the right supports and focusing on the academic achievement piece, as you heard, literacy. What are we doing? And how many of these schools are utilizing their flexibilities? It's putting the right people in the right places based on the data. And once we do that consistently, we will see the impact that all of you want to see, all the community want to see, and what our students deserve. And some of those schools do not have those same level of support. So some people go home and there's literacy taught every day, books. Well, we build it in these schools, and we also, some of the flexibilities where we use those staff. There's schools that they do have a high Spanish-speaking population. We use HR, the human resource flexibility to pay additional funds for the bilingual media specialist, the bilingual receptionist. All of those things matter, and so that's the work. And wonderful job.
If I can, one other thing that we are able to do is collectively, and as James said, we meet every other week, a large group, right? 6 area superintendents, 6 senior administrators, human resources, principal reps, right, to concentrate on this problem. Because it restarts a club you don't want to be in, right? But it provides you some of these flexibilities that can help get you out, right? Which is the goal of every flexibility there. Also, by pooling our resources, and Donna Moore is our sort of champion HR, who sits down with all of our principals on the complexities of those, we're able to branch out a little bit. So several area superintendents knew of a high-flying school in Charlotte, an elementary school. We took, we did 3 separate trips last year, bringing principals, their teams, to see how they were doing it, how they were utilizing instructional staff, how they were utilizing progress monitoring, et cetera, and take those lessons back. I think Dr. Ashburn's about to go out there again with some folks. So it doesn't only give us sort of individual power, but it gives us collective power. That's a great benefit for all our students.
Would this be a good time for questions? I think we're all so excited about your academic excellence and just want to celebrate the work that you've done and we're just in really awe of what you've been able to achieve. So are there any questions that you'd like to take, Ms. Edmonds and Mr. Swanson, Mr. Hershey, and Dr. Amy?
Thank you. I'm going to put Mr. Nieder on the spot. So around 2010, when the Restart model was introduced by the General Assembly, is the same time that the General Assembly removed funding flexibility from educators. And so this is exciting. I also think it is an example of educators know what to do with their resources to help their students. And I believe that, it is regrettable that that funding flexibility was taken away from all schools and all educators. We also got Read to Achieve. You were talking about your reading growth. So folks that are non-educators, instead of allowing that funding flexibility for all, chose to mandate Read to Achieve rather than letting educators do what they need to do for their students with their flexibility and funding. So resources. I'm not asking you to editorialize, but those things are in line. That's
yes. During that period of time, 2010, 2011, 2012, it was actually my recollection as it was over several legislative sessions that the erosion of flexibility and the capacity for LEAs to convert resources from one use to another or from months of employment to others, or perhaps vice versa, began shrinking. And it was also during that same period of time, that very short period window, that the charter cap came off. And so the charter cap, perhaps ironically, the charter cap came off, and while charters are not restricted in their flexibility in conversion of resources, so you've got an expanding group that has added flexibility, and meanwhile all the LEAs are getting reduced and reduced flexibility at the same time.
If I could just add before the next question, one of the great things about this process and what's helped us is we've tried to give them an environment where they could fail forward, right? There's been some things that some schools have tried that have not had the impact that we thought it would have, but we've been able to modify that, and they've been able to try it and ensure that whatever it is that they're doing, it meets the needs of their population, and that's important.
so a follow-up to that. I
Sure.
had on here, have some of the Restart schools tried calendar flexibility? Because that's on the list of, right? I didn't see that as one of your examples, but
We have.
is that an example of something that maybe didn't work like you thought it would? Or?
Yeah, and the fact that we have a lot of calendars within the district already. We did convert some schools based on their calendars. What we have to do is to ensure that we're building in, if you're going to do a different calendar, you have to build in additional supports along the way for students. And so I think that was definitely a takeaway.
That is a takeaway, and I would also say now is one of the ones that we do not promote and encourage as much because it impacts families and the staff. And so when this first started, I was in the assistant superintendent of HR role, and the calendar flexibility was a beast in our department because you had staff who had to put in for a transfer. They could not do it. So we do not encourage that any longer. What we do is if we can manage to support the flexibility of a calendar change as it relates to going to single track, that's easier for families. And modified has already been taken off based on general statute. State statute doesn't allow us to do the modified calendar as much, and some of you probably know that as well. So It is one of the flexibilities, but we do not utilize it as much because it does impact the staff and it does impact families and the choices that they make. So I would say that.
Thank you all for the presentation. I was projecting a little bit louder since the air is going on. And thank you, Chief Ellis. I know I've spent many hours in your office talking about Restart Schools, talking about low performance schools, and so thank you for assuring me and others that there are some plans and that you're going to make it happen, and just great to see the data. And I guess I'll start by saying, wouldn't it be great if all of our schools had Restart model like charter schools? Since we don't have the same model, and I won't be too, I'll digress and not be too petty. But my question is, I know it's a lot of work on teachers coming into low performance schools, coming into Restart Schools. So how do you incentivize, boost that morale, and so what are some of the ways that you all as leaders are able to support staff, and then on the district side, what are we able to do to build that partnership, or fill those gaps rather?
So, you know, when you initially become a Restart School, there's not a great perception, right? Like, we all know why we're in that Restart status, and so it really comes from the admin team really giving the knowledge to the staff to truly allow them to understand what it means to be a Restart School. For us, it was a lot of mind shift work, work from being about teachers and work being all about kids. And so once we shifted our thought in that direction, that everything that we do at Forest Hill is because of kids, all of our work is because of kids, teachers got it. And so we are constantly, everything that we do and every conversation that we have, we're like, okay, so how is this going to impact the student? Not necessarily how is it going to impact you as a teacher, but how is it going to impact the students? And we really do have a great culture where our teachers really just get that. And so for us now, it's easy, it's seamless. But I mean, it's a lot of celebrations of all the things, even the little baby steps that we make, to the big giant steps that we make. We are constantly celebrating and letting everyone know that it's because of your hard work, all of your dedication and your love for our kids and the work that you're putting in, that our kids are seeing the growth that they've made. Does that answer your question?
So let me talk about some of the other flexibility some of my principals have done, which might point to that. So James mentioned earlier the calendar, that you can have staff stay beyond, right? You can pay to have staff stay beyond or come early, or pay them over the summer to create pacing guides, which we've done at a lot of our schools, which are really great to hand over to a new first grade teacher to say, here's a pacing guide, the data that supports it. To provide data days where they can really take time outside of their PLCs to dig in, where the principals are allowed, able to pay for subs to do that. And even flexibilities in roles. I recently had a new Restart principal who had a teacher who has decided to stay home as a mom and doesn't want the full time, but she's fantastic. He doesn't want to lose her. And so he's able to do some conversions and to bring her back to do some push-in with new teachers half days. So because of the flexibilities that these principals can use, they can do things for their staff who are, high performing that maybe a non-Restart school might not be able to do. In addition to, we have done some things in the past with some incentives. It's complex, right? Sign-on bonuses, it's complex. So it doesn't always recur, but there are some things that principals can think of. Okay, how do I keep good people at schools that may be harder, further away?
In addition to that, what I would add from a leadership standpoint, some of the things that they're doing with their staff, we're doing with our principals as well. And so when you can remove some of those barriers and people see that, you're trying to make my job better or easier for me to accomplish the goal, that goes a long way. In the beginning, it's tough because you have to cross that line in order to be designated a Restart School. But then once you do, it's all about the opportunity that it provides for you, right? So what can we do now that we have the opportunity to do something different, utilize these flexibilities? And so that's important. And so I can't echo enough some of the things that Mark stated. Those things make a difference with the staff because they know then that you care. You're willing to pay me a little bit more if I have to stay later, That's very important to a staff member. And then you're even going to get twice as much back because they're going to work even harder or longer anyway. And so just knowing that you're able to show them that you appreciate them and we're able to compensate you for that goes a long way. And that's just one example of it. That's one thing.
For us, and coming in on a school that had already done so much growth being new, it's very clear that the vision was cast, right? And I anticipate that it was a hard sell at first because, like you said, Restart is not something that you want to be a part of, but understanding the journey. And so that's my work moving forward, is ensuring that teachers understand the journey and celebrating our successes. We've come this far, and not losing the vision that we still have work to do and we still have ways to go. And so just building that culture of support for one another. And again, teachers feel really supported with all the extra instructional support that we've thrown in using the flexibility. So that is a strong help to that culture and keeping folks going.
What I would want to add to that is, you've probably already heard, the leadership does matter. The leadership matters. The data matters, and how you use data to inform the planning around making some of these decisions. And what happens is when you do have a lot of turnover, as you can see with Mr. Chu, Mr. Overman, James has done an incredible job on boarding him, along with colleagues and peers. Sometimes what we do, we do put new principals in the school, in a Restart school, without any type of historical background of it. And when we do that, we can't sustain whatever momentum that we have already accomplished. And so I want to say that the flexibility in my office that we also utilize, and thank you, Mrs. Waters and all the board, and David, everyone, for giving us the additional executive leadership coach. So we have 4 coaches now. And I'm assuming that the reason that you all champion for it is because you've heard great things coming out of these schools when you visit them of what the impact of that work. And so almost all of the Restart schools, they all have a coach. And each one of those executive leadership coach, they have a primary load of around 8 primary, about 4 or 5 consults. And so in some way or another, the principals are getting support, because it is so important to understand the strategic leadership around Restart. You can't have the innovation without it. And so that's what, I don't want to leave with just 2 incredible principals here who are seasoned, who have been onboarded beautifully, to not say it takes lots of vision. It takes planning ahead. And when we don't leverage those Restart dollars and flexibilities, it's oftentimes a lack of the planning that goes along with it. And that is why we are meeting, and first, that's why we set up a core team. That is why we have such a strong relationship with the senior administrative school improvement planning process and the state team, and that we have PLN networks, and that our principals and they can bring teams to attend those to listen to best strategies and the best practices around it. And we're doing some modeling of, we just brought Abbott on in some of our schools, and we're looking at how we can strengthen Abbott in some of the Restart schools. So those are just a few.
Thank you. I was going to be my follow-up that you led into us sharing those successes and those lessons with other schools, which I think is something that we don't quite see in charter schools. They do not allow public schools to be innovative or share what's working, what's not working, and we're kind of left to figure it out. So I'm grateful to hear that, and I think this board definitely will support whatever initiatives and new ideas that we have in order to put us as that premier district in the nation to show what we can do. So thank you.
Are we permitted to use local dollars to take some of what is working and apply it to schools who are right on the edge, that they are not currently low performing, and say, we don't want them to backslide, let's start implement, and obviously we lose some flexibility, but does that drive a budget conversation for local dollars? Do we think about?
It does, but I would say, because we do have Mr. Nita and we have Ms. Moore. We have some people here from the Budget Finance Lens, but most of these schools are designated Title I schools. So they also have Title I funding to support it, some needs as well, particularly those on the bubble. But we also have targeted enrollment, and that targeted enrollment is when a school has a need. They do not have the funding and the flexibility to do some of the creative things that you've heard today. They request that through the area superintendent, and the area superintendent sends that to me as a request. I review that request and I send my approval for it. If there are questions, we send it back. But to your point, when we have a school that has Title I, we make sure that they're maximizing those dollars as well, so that we're not sending Title I dollars back. Because again, a lot of leadership in these Title I's and Restart schools, brand new, 2 and 3 year principals, sometimes first year principals, and they don't know what they don't know around the funding. So as for local dollars, I would still say about the targeted enrollment piece of it. Because Title I, as you all know, that's federal dollars, but still that's an additional funding source. And Mr. Nita?
Yeah, and Dr. Ellis said it well as it relates to funding that's available to Restart schools, that we absolutely want to take advantage of those funds, whether it's Title I or other state or federal funds, are used it for the most part, they would revert at the end of the fiscal year. Local funds have much more flexibility. I'm not just speaking in terms of Restart schools or the schools that are not Restart, but potentially are on the cusp of becoming Restart schools. There are very few restrictions placed upon local funds, but perhaps one overriding restriction is they're not unlimited. They're a zero-sum source, and they're currently all budgeted. So if the desire is to use some local funds for a particular use, then what will we reduce doing, or what will we stop doing?
Or we just ask them for more money.
We like that too.
What I would add to that comment is that, too, what we see from a leadership perspective are the conversations that principals have with each other. So just because they're Restart, they're not limited to the conversations or POTs that they're in. They're able to share those strategies, and sometimes it's about alignment. And so there's still things that those schools can gain from the Restart schools, even though it's not a financial commitment. There are still things that they learn from.
Thank you.
Dr. Ng, I think the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and thank you. I was listening in the car on my way here, so I may have missed something. If you could clarify, if a school is out of the current low performance status, are they still in the program or continue to be in the program, correct?
They do continue to be, but there is an exit. Many of the schools, as I think as Ms. Hafner said it best, did I pronounce that correctly? She said it best is that initially you feel like, oh, I'm in Restart, I know how I got there. And then they don't want to come out of it because they have these flexibilities you have just heard about.
Right.
But they can exit it. We have to apply to exit the Restart model. Yeah.
And a lot of them would be willing to fight to keep it because, and it's similar to other things that we implement, right? So if we help the schools and they have the support to get out of that status, and then you pull the resources away, then a lot of times they'll fall.
You don't want to lose that flexibility.
Exactly. So those 4 that are that have been removed, they have moved themselves out of recurring low performance. They're still getting all the Restart flexibilities, but they are C schools. They, and so we want to keep it as much as we can keep those flexibilities.
That's the sweet spot.
That's the sweet spot.
And second question was if you could clarify, you talk about human resource piece where you could have teachers outside of the required certification areas. Can you expound on that and what does that mean and how much are we utilizing that type of flexibility?
Yeah. So I think probably a part of the conversation that you missed was coming out of COVID, we had a different pool of applicants. And so that pool had dwindled some. And so having that flexibility to be able to hire someone out of their certification area provided us the opportunity to have a qualified, not qualified necessarily, but a competent adult to work with students in different areas. And so sometimes it can be a music teacher, and we could have people that have performed or worked in the music industry, but not necessarily gone through the certification process to become a music teacher. And so they have the opportunity to hire people outside of the certification areas.
And I think that's a good example, and if you're thinking along content as well, so you could have a person who, maybe that person is an engineer, but they can teach math.
Right.
And they understand the science, but they haven't gone through the certification.
Right.
And so we have those two, and it's probably a little akin to our lateral entry model as well, you know, and given where the pool, when that pool became low, we needed to do more things, and the schools that are the hardest sometimes have to face the most challenges in recruiting staff or teachers are our designated low performing schools. And because of that, we use that certification flexibility or the lack of it.
And are we still keep open to that, using that strategy, that flexibility?
Oh, yeah.
And so there's a route towards certification if that person chooses to continue on, or?
Yes, there is a route to certification. I think if Ms. Stedham doesn't mind, she can tell you that route.
So these individuals then would like to become a teacher. There is a residency pathway where they can go through to become and we will return to an educator provider program. And we have one here in partnership with Durham, once it's together in Durham. So many of them will come through that program and get certified through us. It's additional coursework, it's the license exams, it's taking their portfolio and TBA because they all once they complete all of those standards that are needed for their license. And one of the flexibilities I know some of our principals have used to support those teachers is they use some of their lab salary to assist with tuition for those EPs. So again, another example of working with teachers to retain them and make them feel valued for the work that they're doing every day.
Great.
And I should have remembered that. I've signed a lot of those payments, so we paid for them to get their certification. So, yes. Yes.
So also important to know too, we don't just put them in the classroom and leave them, you know, when they're coming from a non-certified area. So we do try to put supports and things around them to ensure that, you know, they're learning and moving forward as well.
Jay, they're really considered a beginning teacher, so they get all of this beginning teacher supports for the first 3 years and all of them to teach their licenses and mentor and all of that.
Yes.
Just actually,
Okay.
I can hold
Ms.
my.
Happy, and then we will come back to Ms. Evans.
that was actually my question, is whether or not they pursue a certification. I wanted to ask if we give them the support they need, because just because you're an expert in a topic doesn't mean you understand how children learn and like, right. So that, I'm glad to hear that. So that was my question.
I just want to say, I love seeing the flexibility that principals are allowed to address their individual school populations. And, you know, as a parent of 3 kids, one that is still in a restart school, or wait, maybe they're all in restart schools, I don't know. I think they might be. I think they are. It just, you don't see it, right? Like, you walk into any school, it feels like any school, it is that same, and just the same with Title I, it is the same. And, you know, it just goes to show that letter grade only means so much, but you hear about the day-to-days, and it just, I'm having, you know, flashbacks to our conversation yesterday, like, being able to use those conversion funds in order to get more support positions, or I'd love to learn more about a restorative learning lab, like you know, and accessing the whole child, like that is that piece, doing what's right for students in order to lift them up so they can see their full potential. And, you know, having been at a school where people are like, oh, but that school, you're sending your kids to that? Yes, I am, because of the magic that happens, and this is just one of those things that allows teachers to be who they are and see. And so I just want to say, as a parent, thank you for doing this extra work, because I see it as a parent of 3 kids. I know the parents that are at our school are all proud to be a part of that school, and I know it's more. I know Title I comes with a lot of extra hoops. We no longer have ESM, so that's not an additional hoop that you have to go through. But I just want to say thank you, because I know it's a lot, and I know you don't always hear that, but that work is seen and felt and valued by students and parents alike.
And we know we're getting close to time because we have the magnet in our area as well, and we still have Dr. McMillan. And so we'll try to
Yeah, we'll speed up.
speed up a little bit.
The things that are important to know is that we do have a collaboration with DPI. And so we are working with them. Every year, Restart Schools provide an annual report to DPI. DPI kind of goes through that report. We go through it together. We debrief that report together. We look at where there are options to improve or things to replicate in other places. So that's really important to know.
And they do give feedback.
They do.
They
yeah.
do. And
they,
the first 3 to 5 years, no feedback. So it felt like a kind of wasteful process to do all of that reporting and nothing comes back. But they have changed that, and I think they were just also trying to figure this thing out. They were also, navigating what Restart looks like. But they do give very good feedback now that we now share with our principals to make sure that they are aligned with what the vision and mission of these principals are of Restart.
So they actually come to the district, debrief that with us, and so that's good. And then we're able to share those strategies with the district, with the schools. The other thing that we have, and this is the first time that we've gone through this, is that we have an authorization review that we do. And the first 2 schools that were out of the gate, Barwell and Walnut Creek, are right in this process right now. And so we're all learning about this process and kind of how we're moving things forward. But this has been an addition that's been added to ensure that after a 5-year period, what is the impact that the flexibilities are having on the schools? Sometimes those are student growth, sometimes there are other data points and things that they're looking at. And so we're in the process of doing that. By policy, you could either get continued authorization. For instance, if you come out of low performing status and you stay out of low performing status, then you're good. You could have a situation where a school needs to reapply, and you would just say, these are the things that we've done with the Restart model, these are things that we expect to continue. And then, as Ms. Ellis stated earlier, you can submit an application to exit, though I think some of our principals would fight us if we do that. But important to understand those points. And then you have a copy of this. This is just the format that they follow for that process. This is DPI's chart. And then I'll kind of wrap up with, in this year, what we're focused on this year are implementation with the 4 new Restart schools. So we had 4 schools that started at the start of the year. We're working with them. We talked about the professional learning networks that one of our own will speak at next week. We're looking at the continuing and building out the partnership with DPI. And then we are continuing our school site visits, particularly for those schools that are doing very well, and looking at hosting a couple of site visits as well for our schools that are doing well. And then, of course, you know that we've talked about and done the summer program and retesting as well. So those continue to be a focus for us for this year.
Unless you have additional questions. Yes, Ms.
And these are on behalf of Ms. Johnson Hostler, who was unable to be here, so she sent some questions, if I may. She has asked, do we have concrete plans to address schools who have been Restart for more than 3 to 4 years, which at each level is nearly the full cycle for students at elementary, middle, and high school? How do we move the needle for those students?
So that's a great question. We've talked about the annual report so that we go through every year to review kind of how the school is performing, how the flexibilities are impacting those schools. We talked about the 5-year report that's due that we do as well with DPI. But we also have a lot of other things that are kind of in play that we do to ensure that those schools are moving the needle and getting growth. So we talked about the collaboration with DPI, but we also have actual people that come in and provide support to schools. Sometimes it's professional learning, sometimes it's guidance in alignment with our school improvement plans. We look at the flexibilities and align that tightly with the school improvement process, and we revise that on an annual basis to be sure that schools are addressing the needs that they need to address. We talked about many of the schools have an executive leadership coach that are working closely with the principals, schools, and their school improvement teams to help move them. We also have schools that are participating in the designated, not the designated, but the North Carolina Instructional Leadership Academy, and that is something that is put on by DPI. But those principals actually go in and participate in sessions over the course of the year. And so it just helps them in being able to hone in on their instructional leadership skills, which are very important. That's a big part of what we do. Let's see if there's anything else I've
I think
overlooked.
I'll just add about the flexibilities. It's learning from those 4 schools, how they have been able to stay off of the recurring low performing and taking those best practices. I think until we've had this opportunity or the opportunity to have enough data to support, it's, 1 year is a fluke. I tell anyone that around data, but when you're off 3 and 4 years, that's no longer a fluke. It's working. And so I think to Ms. Johnson-Hostel's question is really about truly continuing with data informing what you do and looking at what are those best practices. And as you've heard from 2 incredible principals, it is about focusing on the literacy, focusing on some core content, focusing on ensuring that you have support instructional staff in those classrooms, that you don't have students just sitting. And we would all love to say, hasn't that been going on for a long time? No, I think anything that you begin to be really targeted, focused, and be intentional about is when you see that occur, that traction and that achievement happen. And so I think that's just important. And selecting the right leaders for those schools is a passion for it, ensuring that we are now working with budget and working with human resources. These flexibilities did not exist at the level that we are doing them now, not even 2 years ago. Every year we have increased those flexibilities because some of those decisions were our decisions, a district decision, not what the state allowed as flexibilities. And I think the more and more we utilize those flexibilities, the more and more we're going to see that consistency from elementary, middle, and high school. And then those networks that these schools now have is not just being in your region and leading the area superintendent meeting. It is also about the opportunity to work with other leaders, since we are talking about 7 districts, 7 regions that have Restart. It's good to get all 30 of them, and now 34 with those 4 additional ones together. And I also will follow up. Ms. Johnson-Hostel also did an incredible job. She sent me those questions as well, and I will also send it to her in an email response and copy the board.
Okay, that sounds perfect, because she had a couple more questions, and so I want to be mindful of the rest of our presenters, but certainly very humbled and honored to be able to hear from principals who have shown the academic excellence and lived it out and are doing incredible work. So glad to see you here today. And I just have one question. So you have mentioned this incredible core team that you have established, which is amazing to see the collaboration, and you've also mentioned the addition of a new coach. Are there any gaps in terms of staffing? I know sometimes budget, but I think it's helpful to make a business case, or at least have us awareness. Are there any gaps in staffing that you feel would enrich your ability to do the work that you're doing?
I probably should start with the principals. I will say that we are still turning principals who want to coach away. We don't have the capacity. I think with a district this size, and Mr. Needham, maybe he'll get me later, but a district this size with area superintendent supervising anywhere between 20 and 25 up schools, having a coach assigned to those areas is critical. And so if you think about 4, and given the level of intense work and visioning and data review and being strategic, it takes more than what we have. And so if you think about 4 with 6 to 8 primary, we're not covering all of them. So they sometimes they come to me and say, Jackie, it's fine. They say, Jackie, I don't think I can do this. And so I would say, if I looked at staffing I would think that another a coach would be fantastic. And I don't know what the team would say. We are very responsive, but I think they probably would feel the same way.
I have Kim Grant as my coach, and she is the most amazing person ever.
Yeah, you took her away.
And I mean, it's just been helpful just to have a thought partner in the work, because while I have my AP, being a principal is a different hat, and she gets it. So just thinking through some things, and I mean, yes, there are more coaches. I think that would help every single research school for sure.
And she and I have not talked at all, have we?
No.
It is really, when you look at the data, it really does support
Do
that
you have
level
a
of.
specific number though, like, we need 4 more, or we need 5 more? 'Cause that for me is useful. If you just say 1 and then next year you need another, but do we need 5 more? Do we need 10? You know,
Or
what do we need so we can build towards it?
What would be the better ratio? Because right now with
Right.
10 additional, we're looking at 11 schools for 4 per coach. So what would be a ratio that would be, and I guess you could blow that to our area superintendents as well, because we know that they have way more schools than they should.
What I would say, and I know that's pie in the sky since you're asking me.
absolutely.
Pie in the
Be
sky
bold
would
in your
be
ass,
one
yes,
per-
yes.
one per area, to be honest.
Okay.
And I say that because right now we're at 7. Yes, we have one that has 1 restart school, but we have schools that are A, B, and C schools that aren't meeting growth with your subgroups. And it's not just about it. It's talking about the first year principals, first and second year principals. They need a coach, and we are providing that through other measures. So we have a whole team of retirees who now support in a very limited way our first year principals. And so I think ideally, a district our size, we would have one per area. And I can bet you, I see Dr. Ashburn looking like, yes. Don't forget, she was one of the first North Carolina principal of the year. So she's shaking her head. She knows. We do. It would be so beneficial. And that could be a multi-year approach to it. But I don't see how we start another year, knowing that we have 10 schools eligible to do restart and not have that level of support. And I think Ms. Moore, Donna has been quiet there. She takes on a task that's incredible.
Yes.
Trying to control the budget alone. She's humble. She will not say that, but I'm sure she would be very happy if we had one more of her in the position. And so that's a different conversation. But for now, it's ensuring that we have a coach per area at the minimum.
For me, I think it's important for you all to tell us, so we become the flagship. I kind of view it as that, and to meet the strategic plan. And so if there are, give it to us, let us know, so we can go to bat for it and talk to county commissioners and begin to have those conversations.
The state.
The state man is right there.
I'll add to Ms. Sliver that is absolutely the part that makes this work happen in the school. The new principal having a leadership coach. So that was part of what I did with we had these local family districts. And we had coaches that were working with these principals. Things that were, as Eleanor Ashburn, when she was a principal, things that were second nature to her. A new principal just does not know and understand them. So when you're talking about a low performance, it's even that much more important. So you heard me mention in my inauguration working with John Smith as his assistant principal. That year, under an experienced principal, makes all the difference in the world. So when we talk about coaching principals that are in these kinds of schools, it makes all the difference in the world. It's certainly something I think we should move towards as a district, not just for local performance, but new principals in general. Jack, I think you said that leadership matters. Not only for Preston, we see the same thing with coaches in terms of teachers. We have teacher coaches that go in and do the same kind of work that we do in experience those are the kinds of things that help move the ball in any school. So there's something we can do to work towards that. As we say, budget constraints, we got to figure out what we do different, what we leave off the table. But this absolutely makes a difference. We see it reflected.
Thank you very much. And I will be sending those responses to the entire team.
Thank you.
So, our next person is the Dr. Lane. Thank you so much. I'm going to move to, no, she should be.
Oh, no, she said it's a little quick.
Good afternoon. Look, I'm going to correct Chief Ellis, and I don't normally get to do that. I'm not passionate about magnet schools. I'm passionate about kids. And what you just heard with Restart is, can I do that? Is an example of the flexibility we need from the state that we don't often have. So we always look for innovative educational models. Magnet schools are one of those. You've heard me say many times, I don't think they're the answer to all of our ills. I don't think they're the problem to all of our ills. They are a tool to help us for innovation, for diversity, for the things that matter to us, for our students in the district. But I just want to call attention to that 40% of our Title I schools are magnet schools. 23% of those are Restart schools. So when we're looking at magnet schools or citing new magnet schools, we're looking at similar data. So when you ask about looking at schools that are on that cusp, I punched Dr. Savage over here and I said, we apply for an MSAP grant because that's where we can get some federal dollars to really try to support a school that is headed down a particular path that we want to make sure we're trying to capture and bring back and provide some additional supports for. So as you are aware, beginning in 1976, Wake County became a model in the nation for using the desegregation plan through their student assignment. And this is when the merger happened between Raleigh City and Wake County Public Schools. In 2015, our board unanimously approved the magnet principles that are kind of our strategic guiding practices in our office and in our work. And that's helping to reduce high concentrations of poverty, promoting diversity through school integration, maximizing use of school facilities, and provide innovative and expanded educational opportunities. And I just want to call attention to the last bullet, because a lot of times when we talk about magnet programs, we talk about the programming, and we forget about the programming is important, but what's important is how the students access that programming and making sure that we are creating whole school magnet programs. I've said out loud that Stow, Jeffries Grove, and Hodge Rudder are only 3 programs within schools, and our commitment to the board has been to look at that and see how we might move away from a program within a school and go whole school, so it impacts all of our students. So part of this is just background. Chief Ellis told me I had to stay high level because she says I'm passionate about this work, as she said, but there are about 5,000 magnet schools across the U.S. Most of them you will find in urban districts, so there's about 608 districts across the United States that use them, again, most in urban areas, so think L.A., Miami-Dade, Houston, New York City, lots of districts, Nashville, Tennessee. So a lot of states are utilizing them as a form of public school choice, but also as a role in socioeconomic integration. When I talk about the history, I call particular attention to Wake County being the model for moving away from race assignment of students long before the parents involved, 2007 Supreme Court case, and you may have heard that mentioned in the recent ruling with the Supreme Court over affirmative action that impacted the higher eds. Our ruling came much earlier in K-12 education for looking, not assigning students by race. And so Wake County was a pioneer in moving towards socioeconomic integration
for the whole student assignment plan. Promoting diverse learning environments that, and you all said it as well as anybody could, it's not just about test scores. I mean, part of what we want to be able to achieve, had a meeting earlier with our IB national organization, and they were talking about it's what we want for students at the end of their schooling cycle to be successful in their next phase of life. So we look at things like how do we connect to their passions and interests? How do we get them excited about schooling through a lens that keeps them engaged? So they're in attendance, so they're not discipline issues, that they really are engaged in their own learning. And that's promoted through our plans. What you see in the diagram here is from Magnet Schools of America, and I have to be transparent and tell you that I'm president-elect of the organization. I will be president beginning in April 2024, and they say I'm pretty passionate about this work too. So, but really looking at those 5 pillars of diversity, innovative programming, academic excellence, leadership. We've heard today how critical that leadership is, and our principal mentioned Kim Grant. Kim Grant is one of our models that we go to. She was Restart, she was Title I, she was Magnet, all at the same time, and she was a new principal. And in a new building, so she just really did it all. So we use her a lot in coaching our new Magnet principals. I was going to shout out to Donna Moore too, because Donna, dealing with our grant schools, our MSAP grant schools, and Title I funding and Restart funding, we couldn't do that work without the support of many of our district departments, so we really appreciate that. This is our alignment to the strategic plan pillars, and I think we all noted how important that is. If you notice under the aims, it does align with the Magnet priorities. And the aims might read a little bit differently than they do in the actual plan, but that's how the Magnet lens is utilizing that aim, or how we're connecting to that aim. So if you look at the very bottom there, it talks about innovative programming, which is something we want for our students. But we also know we've got to build that capacity in our leaders and our teachers, and how we go about doing that. This past summer, we did the first ever Magnet Summer Institute, where we had our Magnet principals, Magnet coordinators, school improvement chairs, and assistant principals all together for 2 days. And we brought in our equity office, we brought in our academics team, we brought in lots of different folks that were coming in. We had behavioral health there for wellness, we did student assignments, so giving them an array of information. About half of our Magnet principals are new to their role, and about half of our Magnet coordinators are new to their role, and they don't cross over. So we got a lot of new folks trying to build that capacity, but really emphasizing the importance of the work in alignment with our district strategic plan was the big emphasis coming out of the Summer Institute. You mentioned SIP earlier, and we talked about Dr. Ashburn and Michael Seafor here. We've done a lot of work in our central areas. We're highlighting Magnet in our school improvement planning, because if you are Magnet, then you need to be using that for academic achievement, for improvement for your students, and how do you think through that lens. So really helping our leaders align the work, and they have found that very impactful and appreciative of that work. Maybe it's not me. So you are familiar with the history. I thought what was really interesting, and I'll be honest, I've never seen this before, are the guiding principles from 1982. I know that's hard to read in the slide up there, but it's really interesting how for 40 years this district has been committed to the work of being innovative and being integrative through the Magnet programs in the district. And I think you all are well aware that we consider ourselves a model for the rest of the nation in terms of how we support students through these programs. That doesn't mean they're perfect. That doesn't mean that we don't have lessons to learn. I was making notes as you all were talking, and I think one of the things that we have made ourselves aware of is Magnet schools have been used through the years as a school integration tool, but we haven't been as intentional as we've needed to be about classroom diversity integration and teaching, building capacity in our teachers and our leaders to build capacity in our students for engaging with folks that are different from themselves. I think in this current political era, that civil discourse is particularly important. So really not just about building relationships, but teaching students and staff, building capacity that we don't have to always agree to be able to get along and engage in conversation. And that's a good thing for what they're going to find in the workplace. This leads us up to 2023, where we now have 61 magnet schools out of 198, so it's about 40% of our portfolio. Again, I always like to bring attention to many of those are Title I and Restart schools, so our leaders that are doing this work are incredible at what they're doing, and our hats off to them. Our role is of support and trying to remove barriers, so trying to work closely with our district departments to address concerns, whether it's student assignment or transportation, and certainly working closely with our area superintendents in our schools and academics teams. This is an exciting component of our work, and that is that we do know that there's money available from the federal government, and even at the state level, if you looked at the amount of money that's going into charter schools, which are designed around market-based choice compared to magnets that are integrated theory around choice. It's nice to know that there is a federal grant program, Magnet School Assistance Program grant, that provides funds for, it's kind of seed money to start new magnet schools. So like I said, those that may be on the cusp. So if you think about our Eastern Lake schools, that's the newest grant that we just applied for. The ones in the list here, we currently are closing out the 2017 to 22, and that's Bug Elementary, Lincoln Heights, Millbrook Elementary, and Southeast Raleigh High School. We're still working with what we call Project Nexus for 21-26, and you see the schools listed there. And then our Project Synergy is the 22-27. And normally these grants are a 5-year cycle. But because of money on the federal table, that cycle has come up more frequently. I don't know if I can do it, Mark. You're going to have to do it. You're going to have to do it. So drum roll, we just found out.
We received the MSAP grant for the 2 new ones.
So Eastwake High School, the Zebulons Middle and Elementary, and Wendell Middle and Elementary. And we are just beyond thrilled the impact. Mark's words, when I called him on the phone to tell him, he said this is going to be a game changer for our schools in this area. So our next grant, in your honor, is going to be called Game Changers. So, the Department of Education has asked us not to make that public in writing yet, but they did give us permission to tell you all so that we could celebrate. So we look forward to being able to make that official and make that announcement. I will note that it's the largest MSAP grant we've ever received, so it is $14.9 million, and it's for 5 schools, so that will put us over the $100 million mark for MSAP grants. And somebody over here in this corner, Dr. Robinson, calls me money bags, and I have to remind him that that money has to be used for students in these schools. So it's not just available for all things. We do have to be very careful with things like facilities and transportation, and that's why we come to you to ask for your support in making those things happen as we're building these programs. Eastern Wake Forest Elementary is a perfect example of where we are trying to place magnets in areas where we're losing a lot of our base students to charters and privates, and really trying to work on winning back the base. And to make those schools marketable, we do need help and support with facilities and transportation. So just a list of the newer revised magnets in early colleges in the last decade. I decided 10 years was probably enough. You see these are locally funded as opposed to MSAP funded, and then our early colleges. I don't believe in getting ahead of ourselves, so we created the slide last week. That was before the announcement, so I had to separate Elevate just to be sure.
So we are excited to add those groups to our list. This is just a visual of where most of our magnet schools, you've heard me say probably before, that the majority of them are in the urban core. And most of those facilities are older, which is part of what happened with the merger, under-enrolled schools. We have since gone out a little bit more into the suburban rim, like a Lincoln Heights. But Lincoln Heights was there long before the influx of growth into the area. Wake Forest Elementary was a magnet school 25 years ago. We demagnetized it because the area changed so much, and now it's changed yet again, a lot due to the loss of market share in that particular area. That just lists the numbers by grade spans. We always include Crossroads Flex and Southeast Raleigh Elementary School. They function a little differently, but they're under the Magnet and Curriculum Enhancement umbrella. So that's our 61. I just wanted to briefly highlight, and this is a link in your PowerPoint on our website, what our parents can go to and learn about the pathways. Our particular themes, a lot of questions come up about how we choose those things, and we do a lot of engagement with our schools that are proposed to be in the grant, with families in those communities, with our families who apply for magnet during the magnet application window during recruitment. We also include students in those buildings, those new programs, and since my tenure, we've also done some focus group work out in the area. So when we started working at Eastern Wake, we brought in a business alliance group and asking questions about what skills do you want your students or your workers to have that we can build programs. I've shared that usually when we come to you with recommendations for new programs. STEM was at the top of the list. Arts was number 2, which is how we develop things around design thinking and creative arts and the iSTEM. Elementary school, East Wake High School in particular, is our iTech, and it's going to align very closely with the Wake Tech Eastern Wake campus, where they're going to have very advanced manufacturing. And I don't know about you, but when I think about advanced manufacturing, I think about machinery. And they said this is the 3rd iteration where it's gone from machinery to programming to now everything is digital. Like it's Bluetooth, transferring of that information. So a lot of high-tech skills, coding, robotics, all of that's a big part of that. So we're very excited about that partnership. You see the numbers in parentheses, and that's just the number of the things that we have in those particular areas. I think you're well aware that our early colleges target first-generation college students, and that creates also a need for making sure we're providing access for families across the district to get into those programs. And they've been really good about working toward, our goal is about 70% of their student population is first gen. Wake STEM has done an incredible job of being a role model for doing that work, and we're continuing to work with all of our early colleges for that purpose. As I think you also know, we're entering recruitment and marketing season, so we start applications October the 16th. Our early college fair is coming up, as you see here on October the early college, October the 19th, I knew I'd get it eventually. And November the 4th is our Magnet Fair, which is the big fair, and this year is at Garner Magnet High School. Last year it was at Enloe. We've had it at Southeast Raleigh previously. Part of our goal internally is to rotate between our Magnet High schools. We had a lot of feedback from families last year that they loved being in a school so they could see pictures of the students and get a sense of what the programming was in the school. So we contemplated trying to go outside the school into like the conference convention center or somewhere like that, but based on parent feedback, we've kept it in our schools. But trying to rotate the areas so that we can gather more interest from our families. And then questions for you.
Can I interject a little bit? I know we have to have 30 minutes for Dr. McMillan's presentation. So, and I do know that we are also engaged in some of the small meeting discussion around Magnet. And I say that simply because I want to be very respectful and considerate of the time and the planning that has occurred in Dr. McMillan's office.
Well, thank you. We are certainly appreciative, Dr. Lane, for your passion for children and the work that you have shared this afternoon. And you have provided a great overview of magnet schools. So, thank you.
Well, I will just
Congratulations. Ms. Hershey, congratulations.
Congratulations to a great Wake County Public Schools team. It takes a team. And I do want to give a shout out to Cindy DeFore, who is our leader in our grants office. We couldn't do it without our grants team and everybody. So thank you, and thank you all for your support.
We have one quick question, Chairman Happy.
Very quickly, in the vein of what Ms. Waters and Mr. Hershey asked of our previous folks, what do you need to continue to grow this program? Is it a designated marketing person? Is it, what is your, what are you looking for? What is on your wish list?
So unlike what Dr. Robinson says, we are not money bags, except for family grant dollars that target the schools. What we haven't kept up with is the pace in the local magnet office. So we currently have 2 marketing and recruitment folks in our office that supports the work that started when we had about 28 schools, and we now have 61. If I could ask for anything, it would be to create some local support positions so that we can better support our schools. One of the greatest needs we have right now is with magnet curriculum, because with HB 49 and with our unique programming that we have in there, that magnet curriculum sometimes is dated, and we really need to get in there and provide. Our principals are begging, our magnet coordinators are begging. They don't have the resources to be able to do that. So those would be my biggest 2 things, is expanding on those local resources. Thank you for asking.
Put it out in the ether.
Yes.
Chair White, being respectful of the time, I won't ask my question, but if we should miraculously get through the next presentation before 5, is there a chance that we could come back to and ask the question later?
Absolutely. If you all will still be here and available, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, thank you. And thank you all for being considerate of your colleague and the work that has gone on by Dr. McMillan's team, but we are certainly grateful for all that you have presented. Very rich discussion, Chief Ellis and team. And Dr. McMillan.
Hey, good to see everyone again. I'm going to perform a miracle for Mr. Haggerty here. I have a little bit of an advantage because I know all of you were at by memory, all of you were at the work session yesterday, and there is some overlap between our testing and accountability results that the state releases and our strategic plan goals. So that means I can spend a little less time on some of those. But I just wanted to give you a kind of an overview of the testing and accountability results that were released last at the state board meeting in September last month, and there is some overlap with what we shared with you last night, but some of the things that the state reports about how our schools are classified for accountability are different from our strategic plan, so just wanted to make sure you had a chance to get a rundown of those. And so I'll start with the graduation rate. The kids who graduated in 4 years or less this past spring started their high school careers in 1920, so they had the distinction of having their 9th grade freshman year right as the pandemic was occurring. Their 10th grade year was the very interrupted year where high school students didn't even really get back into the building until March. So it was a bit of a rocky road for them for sure. But we were able to maintain a graduation rate of just under 90% for those students over their 4 years in high school, which was about a 0.3% increase from the previous year. And counting those kids who took a 5th year to graduate this past year from that cohort that was supposed to graduate in 2022, that group of students, their 5-year rate is 91.2. So you can see sort of that slow, relentless upward march that we've had over the last 10 to 12 years. And sometimes the differences between those bars don't look all that large, but if you think about, if you go back to 2012 there and you look at 2022, 23, a difference of about 9%. 9% of a graduating class in a district our large is 1,000 additional kids who are earning diplomas who didn't before. And so if you think about what that means for the life chances for those kids, that makes it seem a lot larger than fractions of percentages. So when we think about kids rather than thinking about rates, sometimes it's a little more meaningful, I think. When we look at our subgroup graduation rates, we have some gaps here that have been with us historically that have been a little bit stubborn. Not all of our student subpopulations graduate on time at the same rate. But the good news from last year is the places where we saw increases were more heavily tipped towards some of those groups that were farther behind. We had almost a 4 percentage point increase for students from economically disadvantaged backgrounds, and about a 3.5 percentage point increase for our English learners, which is our group that, among the ones on the chart here, that lags the most in their 4-year graduation rate. So even though the gain in last year was not particularly large at 0.3%, we're getting it where we need it the most, which is, I think, a good story. With respect to individual high schools, 28 of our high schools had graduation rates that were above the North Carolina state average. In addition, we also had 6 schools that had a 100% graduation rate, and that would be both of our leadership academies, Wake Young Men's and Wake Young Women's, Crossroads Flex, the North Wake College and Career Academy, Wake STEM, which is our neighbor on the corner here, and Early College of Health and Sciences over on the east side. So they were all at 100% this past year. So in addition to graduation rate, one of the other pieces of the state's accountability model is proficiency. We talked a lot last night about the current proficiency rate in the district. This is the percentage of students who are scoring at what we call grade level proficiency, level 3 or above. However, the state also reports in its accountability system sort of a higher bar of the percentage of students who are not at level 3 and above, but at 4 and above, which they call college and career ready. And so that percentage for us this past year was 46.8%. So it's a slightly higher standard that students are measured against that's aligned to college and career readiness from the state. So with respect to individual subject areas, we saw gains in reading and math for our EOGs last year. That you can see here on this chart, the yellow bar is last year, our first full year of assessments post-pandemic, and then the blue bar is this past spring. So up just shy of 4 points in math, slightly smaller gains in reading, and then a little bit of a drop in science that I'll explain a little bit further as we look at individual grade levels here. When we look at our EOCs, so starting up at the high school level, we had gains in all areas here. English 2 and Math 3, so 2 of our 4 EOCs currently now actually have proficiency rates that exceed what they were pre-pandemic. So when you talk about learning recovery or learning loss, or these terms people are throwing around, and 2 of our 4 subjects, we're actually up higher now than we were in 2019 pre-pandemic. So, do you have questions, Matt?
Well, I think I know the answer, but would you clarify that Math 1 score is only kids taking Math 1 in 9th grade, not those that took it in 7th grade?
That is absolutely correct, yes. So we did have a move up there, but that one seems to stick out because it's so much lower than the rest. About 45% of our students actually take Math 1 before they get to high school, and I'll show that here on the next slide. And so even though it looks low, it does not include those kids who've already passed it before they even got to high school. It's only for those students who don't attempt to take Math 1 until they get to high school, which is about half of our students. And so when you put those 2 numbers together, they look much more like the other ones on the chart when you combine the middle and the high school, which you can see here, the row in the bottom here is our middle school Math 1 proficiency, which you can see is much higher. Now the reason for that, of course, is because kids who are taking Math 1 in middle school are generally taking an accelerated math pathway all the way through middle school, such that their 6th and 7th and 8th grade math learning is compacted into 2 years, which allows them to get into Math 1 sooner. So those are generally students who are stronger in math because that's how they qualify to get into the advanced track. So that's why that does look a little bit different. Math, we've seen gains at every grade level, again, usually on the order of about 2 to 4%. 4.9% for our 8th grade Math 1 students is actually the high water mark in terms of the year-over-year gains that we see here for math. And just like with English 2 and Math 3, our grade 8 math EOG proficiency rate and now actually exceeds where it was pre-pandemic as well. And so here we've got kind of the converse of what we just saw on the last slide. You can see that 8th grade math is a little bit lower than all of the other maths because if you're in Math 1 in 8th grade, you don't take the 8th grade EOG test. So that's only for those students who are not in Math 1. And And so the state reports those numbers in kind of a funky way. So every student is either in, every 8th grader is either in that first group for Math EOG or they're in the Math 1 group there. And so because they're separated, it creates that wide gulf between the two groups. With respect to reading, we didn't see quite as much improvement here as we did in math, and also the change in proficiency we saw across the gulf of the pandemic was also stronger in math. So math is bouncing back more strongly than reading, but math also took a larger hit between 2019 and 2022 than did reading as well. Here we've got gains in 4 of the 6 areas. Grade 4 reading, again, is now above where it was in 2019. And that's even with the introduction of new tests in reading that the state put into place a couple of years ago. So certainly a highlight there as well. The one concern I would point out here is our grade 3 reading, which slipped just a little bit. That is actually the 2nd year in a row that it has slipped. So unlike all of the other grade levels that have sort of rebounded post-pandemic, 3rd grade reading has not. It has continued to either stay flat or decline slightly. So that's something that we're looking very closely at to try and understand, because we know how important it is for kids to be able to read successfully by the time they leave elementary school, and the consequences that potentially has for them down the road if they don't. With respect to science, you notice there was a decline overall, but when we separate out the grade 5 and the grade 8, you can see that that decline is really an 8th grade science decline, not necessarily a 5th grade science decline. 5th grade was up a couple of points, and that grade 8 science was down about 3.5 percentage points, which was a bit of a surprise to us. Don't really have a lot of good instructional-based theories or knowledge of why that may have been. Why 8th grade? It could have been that one of the things we have talked a little bit about is the science content that would have been covered in grade 5 was 4 years ago at the beginning of the pandemic. So if there were some gaps and opportunities to learn some of those concepts in grade 5 for those kids in the first year of the pandemic, that maybe some of that may have trickled forward to grade 8, and some of that stuff, some of those building blocks may not have necessarily been there if they didn't, if those gaps were not plugged in grade 6 and grade 7. Where we don't necessarily have a science test to be able to measure that. But again, that's just speculation on our part. When we look at our different subgroups that are part of the state's reporting milieu, all of our student subgroups that we normally report on increased at least slightly last year. So again, good to see that. And again, some of these gains that we're seeing, if we look at our Black African American students, our Hispanic Latino students, we're getting the bulk of the gains in many cases in the places where we need them the most to try and get those groups caught up that have historically underperformed on some of those metrics. This next slide is simply another way to kind of show you what I just showed you a moment ago. This is taking our strategic plan goal and putting that 90% bar up there. And then for each of the subject areas, math, reading, science, and the EOCs, you can see where all the groups fall relative to each other on some of those. And one of the things you'll notice is that the achievement gaps that we do have on proficiency are semi-consistent, but we've got places like Math 3 where they're not nearly as large for some reason. So it's just teasing apart that previous chart where we showed how far the groups were apart and showing that by subject and by grade. Whereas we have other places like English 2 where the gaps seem to be a little bit larger than they are, for example, in Math 3. So each of those dots represents a subgroup, and it also shows you then their relative distance to the strategic plan goal of 90%, as well as showing how close they are to each other, so to speak, because in some cases those dots are right on top of each other, and in some cases they have a little bit of a spread to them. So just an alternate way to kind of show what we had. The third component of the state's model is growth, and growth in North Carolina is measured by EVOS, which is a system from the SAS Corporation down the road here in Cary. And it doesn't measure whether or not kids are passing or meeting grade level standards. It simply measures the amount of growth they have from one year to the next. So it really has nothing to do with proficiency or not. Students can be proficient and grow, or they can be proficient and not grow, or they can be not proficient but still be growing quite a bit. So they are really kind of two completely separate things. And the state classifies schools into one of 3 groups based on how well they get their students to grow from one year to the next. Schools that exceed growth, meaning that they outperform the expectation of the state. Schools that simply meet growth, meaning that their growth was average or typical, and then those who do not meet it because their growth is too far off the pace of the rest of the schools in the state. So it's a 3-level categorization. Last year, we had 84% of our schools be in the met or exceeded category in the state's growth model. which is the highest number that we've had above that line since 2013. So in the last 10 years, that's the best result that we've had. And if you look at simply that not met column there on the right, you can see we were in the teens for a couple of years, and then we had between 30 and 40% of our schools not meeting growth for a number of years, and then post-pandemic, we've had a really nice little rebound to the point where now we're at the best point we've been since 2013 in terms of the percentage of our schools that are at least meeting the state's growth expectations. The state also reports growth by subgroup as well. This is the percentage of schools who met or exceeded growth with the different subgroups that we report on here, and you can see that this ranges anywhere from 84 all the way up to 100%. Again, some of the gaps that we see with our proficiency data are still prevalent here, although they are much closer together to each other than they are on the proficiency metric, ranging from about 83-84% all the way up to 100 this past year. And then the last piece of the state's accountability system are the designations that schools get, and there's two flavors of those. One is the A through F grading system that is based on proficiency and growth. As you all know, we've had this since about 2016, and it's basically an 80% proficiency, 20% growth formula, so it's very heavily tipped toward proficiency in terms of which schools get A's, B's, and down the line. And then also low-performing schools, which you heard a little bit about during the Restart presentation. Those designations were on pause for a little bit during the pandemic because of the lack of assessments being administered for the last 2 years. Those have come back online as well. When we look at the distribution of A through F grades that our schools earned last year, you can see the blue bars here are this past year, and the yellow is the year before. You can see that we've increased the proportion of A's and B's while having drops in the C's and D's, and stayed level with the percentage of F schools. So a little bit of a shift upward in the distribution, which you could kind of, if you think about our proficiency rate was up about 2% last year, and that our growth was the best it's ever been. Those are the two pieces that go into this formula, so it makes sense that we'd be shifting that distribution up towards the A's and the F's a little. And then when we compare ourselves to the state on that, Wake County on this particular chart here is the what do you call that, plum, maroon line, and then the lighter blue line is the state of North Carolina. And so you can see our proportion of A's and B's at 49% is almost double what the state has. And then when we get down to C's, D's, and F's, we have smaller percentages there as well. With respect to low-performing schools, Dr. Overman gave you the definition before. A low-performing school is one that earns either a D or an F in the grading system, and also either fails to exceed growth. To not be low-performing, it's not enough that you're just meeting growth. You actually have to exceed growth, so you have to be in that top third category on growth. And so coming out of the pandemic, you can see on the left here, the state as a whole had a big jump in low-performing schools. We ourselves had a little bit of a jump there. Obviously, with proficiency rates being lower coming out of the pandemic, that was driving a lot of that. And then in the past year, the state dropped just a bit. They dropped 60 schools overall from 33 to 31%, and we had a small jump. We had 4 additional schools total be low-performing this year, so 20 to 21%. So one of the things that seems a little odd about this is if the things that make a school low performing are your performance and your growth, and our performance went up and our growth went up, how could our low performing schools not go down, right? It just kind of makes sense. And so I thought I'd put together a small chart just to kind of explain that. So let me just walk you through this. So this is basically a graph of every school's A, B, C, D, F grade plotted against their growth. And so you can see the red section over there is all the schools who did not meet the state's growth standard. The green is the net, and the blue is the exceeds. So if I'm looking at the bottom left sort of quadrant here, everything from D down and the pink and the green over, those are schools that are classified as low performing because you have to have at least a C, or you have to be in the blue area there with exceeds growth. And when we kind of break out that bottom quadrant, you can see that we've got a lot of schools that are very close to the line there, that are either just barely in the low performing or just barely above it, who if they had just maybe moved a little bit north or a little bit east, could have gotten out of that this year. So a lot of what we see there, I think, with those 4 additional schools this year, even though all of our other underlying metrics were going up, is just some sort of noise or movement around that line there, where there's a few schools who for just a half a point here, a half a point there, could easily be on one side of the line or the other. So even though we've had a couple of years where we've had a little bit of an uptick in low-performing schools, we don't feel like that's something that's necessarily a five-alarm situation. What we're thinking is it's probably just schools fluctuating around that line because our distribution of schools is really kind of clustered right there in many cases. And so we've got a lot of schools that are just on one side of that line with you. And so to sum up, our four-year graduation rate did increase slightly, even though that is the cohort of students that arguably was most impacted by the pandemic over the past 4 years. Our proficiency rates have gone up in most subjects with a few exceptions, including 8th grade science and 3rd grade reading. And some of those metrics are now better than what they were pre-pandemic, and so we're back above where we were in 2019. And the number of schools meeting or exceeding growth was the highest it has been since 2013 this past year, so we feel like, given all of the challenges that we've had in our schools over the past year, that's really a great point of celebration for our folks, because that's what they're about. They're in the growth business. That's what they're doing for our kids every day, and so hopefully that's really rewarding for them, and we're certainly proud of the progress that they're making. And with that is the end of what I have to share here today. I'll take any questions y'all have.
First of all, we applaud your ability to go through all that data in that amount of time and being able to break it down. Yes, so
I'd be happy to answer any questions if I went over anything.
Dr. E, and then Ms. Evans, and then Mr. Hershey.
Well, thank you so much. I love this data. Really, especially the graphs really helps to have a mental image of it. One question, or maybe even a comment, is notice that on this scatter graph where you have the area that I have concern about, not particularly for our schools, but maybe it is, the B that did not meet growth.
Yeah, that's
and
a great point.
it's like that's a danger area to me.
Yeah, the upper left.
Yeah.
And that's if you can kind of visualize what kind of school that is, right? That's a school that's got a lot of very highly proficient kids who come in proficient at the beginning of the year, but we're not necessarily stretching and pushing them in the way that we need to.
Right.
Each of these quadrants is like a type of school that you could imagine, and that's what you see in the upper left there is those schools that get strong proficiency results, get B's, C's, but they're not growing all of their kids, whether they're just not growing kids at the high end or the middle, but that is something that is of concern because you would think that that's a place where you could actually really move the needle quite strongly on that.
Right. I mean, that's an area where if we identify a school like that, we need to really put a lot more attention and resources to it, just so that they don't go further down.
I know that we have to deal with the formula that we have from the state. And so we are classified, low performing or not met growth based on that 80-20 formula. I also know that in Wake County we do, and I'm going to muck up the name, but individual school report cards of our own.
School progress reports.
Or you did? I assume you still do.
Yes, they're on our
So
website.
how do we see that data and compare it to how the state is assigning these?
Well, one of the things you'll notice about our school progress reports on our website is that they don't have the letter grade on. We show all the pieces. We show the proficiency, we show the growth, we show data about school climate based on teacher surveys, teacher turnover data. We try to paint a little bit of a broader picture of what our schools are about. Because to Dr. Eng's point, just simply knowing that a school is a B school or a school that's B that didn't make growth, well, you really kind of got to peel that onion a little bit to understand exactly what's happening there that's causing that to be. And so when school performance grades came about, we started doing those reports just to kind of give people a broader view of what schools were like, so that way all of the information is there. It's actually more information than a simple letter grade, but it allows people to sort of peel that themselves to say, okay, well, why is this school not showing growth? Why is this school not where we want them to be proficiency-wise? And avoid some of the oversimplification, I think, that comes with a simple letter grade that, tells you one thing, but then all that does is lead to all the next layer of questions that people want answers to say, why is it like that?
So just one more comment and follow up on that. I don't assume that you and your department has time to do it, but I would be interested to see if it's possible to put it together, how we would compare if that formula was more balanced as it is in other states.
Yeah, we could definitely do that.
Because I think we're an outlier at the 80-20.
We are a little bit. I know there's been a big push for 50-50 from a lot of districts over the years. There's been some, semi-momentum on some bills here and there. And I think, that there's a lot of, a lot of sentiment behind making that a little bit more even, because schools feel like the growth is what they do. And if you want to get more kids proficient, the only way to get them more proficient is to grow them faster. So, yeah, I agree.
Thank you.
I just have two data requests. You gave us the graduation rates going back to 2011, but then you only gave us the graduation rates by student group going back to 2021. And I was wondering if we could just go back to 2011.
Absolutely.
There's some significant growth in the graduation rate.
Yeah, there has been. I think the only reason we cut it off a little bit there is because the chart was just so busy if we put it up, but we do have it. We can certainly send it to you very soon.
Okay. And I think the other piece of data that I'm curious about, maybe just for last year, is looking at how kids, and it's the growth, it's seeing with the numbers, like how many kids were 3, 4, and 5 at the beginning of your grade exam compared to the end. I'm just wondering how many kids are ultimately who aren't proficient are becoming proficient.
So changing levels.
Or yeah, the different, or if they're started at 3, how many are getting to 4 and 5?
Yep, absolutely.
This is beneficial.
And Chairman Happy and Vice Chair Haggerty, I'm sorry I didn't circle back to you, pardon me.
I was just curious, because we've talked a lot about teacher vacancies and knowing that a lot of those vacancies start in math and science. Do you track whether there's a correlation between, like, I'm looking at the 8th grade science scores, for example, between teacher vacancies in 8th grade science and then the EOG scores? Or is that not a data set that, anecdotally it makes sense in my head, but I don't know if that's something that we've tracked.
It does. We'd have to talk to our colleagues in HR to see exactly how closely we could track that. Sometimes we can know whether a teacher is assigned to a school, but their specific teaching assignment, and whether they're actually licensed to teach in that field. It's probably something we'd have to work with our human resources folks on to unpack a little bit.
And also knowing that some of our largest teacher vacancies are in special education, what is that correlation there for students that are able to, get.
Yeah, absolutely. I think historically, special ed, math, and science have been the 3 most difficult areas, at least to fill positions, although right now I know we
And 3rd grade, but.
Vice Chair Haggerty, you want to bring us home with your question?
Well, again, my question would be for Dr. Lane, if I can.
Oh, okay. Any other questions
Reach back
for
out.
Dr. Millen? Okay, so.
I appreciate that. That's the flexibility. I did want to come back to this because I thought it was an important part of the presentation, and I know we'll have more conversations about this in the future. But as one of those magnet students back in 1982 and having 2 children that have gone through the magnet program and talking to magnet alums, as we look at magnet school offerings around the county, we tend to see some tend to be more desirable than others, right?
Sure.
And some tend to produce greater results toward those magnet goals
Sure.
than others. One thing I'd like to suggest is that there was an awful lot of talk about programming, and programming is important, but I would suggest from the families that go through these schools, the culture is very important and a big draw. And the school culture helps create its notoriety as a good school, a welcoming school, right? And when you look at schools where we might be offering 2 very similar sets of programming, but maybe they're getting different results, if we could find a way to look at culture and leadership in the schools. And I bring all this up because one of the things that you said was that we have a lot of new folks in magnets. And I think we've done a good job over the years of having a coaching tree of staff that will come out of magnet programs, returning to magnet programs. And I'm not saying that you can't do the job if you haven't been in that environment, but I think there's something about that culture that you get from being there and seeing it and seeing it work so that you know what to replicate and you know sort of what those goals should be. And, you know, I know that we might not be able to fill all those positions that way, but I'd like to take a dive into that maybe sometime in the future, because I think the one thing that stood out to me in those schools that were successful was that you had a sense of community. And that you had achievement, you had success, you had maybe cool robotics electives, right? But it really, the ones that really, I think, tended to get the most praise, that the parents wanted to get their kids in, that the kids, as they grew up, talked about being really wonderful, were the ones that had a real sense of community. And I think that's an important ingredient in making those work.
Absolutely, and I would wholeheartedly agree. 2 of my staff members and I are headed out next week with a lot of our Title I folks to a family and community engagement conference for that very purpose. We do look at the teacher working condition survey around the culture piece, and that's part of our data review internally. But absolutely, I think that culture is, and I appreciate you bringing that up. We talked earlier today about how important that is to be welcoming and inclusive. And that's part of the work that we're doing to build capacity around that inclusivity and that feeling of belongingness, regardless of where they are. So thank you. Absolutely.
Thank you, Ms. Waters.
We were just making sure that Dr. Ashburn didn't have anything to add. So very grateful for all this information and another opportunity to celebrate being in a premier district. And so thank you everyone for all your hard work to bring this information. And we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All the students.